you today, and it's my real honor to welcome you to the kickoff of Day 2 of this year's Broadband Conference, Transforming Minnesota. We have had the great pleasure, I think ever since the creation of the Office of Broadband Development, to partner with the staff of the office in putting this conference on, Dana and Diane and her team. We do this together with the Office of Broadband because we share a commitment to the importance of increasing broadband access and adoption across our state. In this partnership, we are all about helping to ensure that all Minnesotans, regardless of their zip code, has access to the broadband that they need and the skills to use it. And we think that getting together at this conference helps us do that. I think this is maybe the 4th year that we've done this together collaboratively as a team with the Office of Broadband Development, and the 14th year that we've had this conference. And so I was thinking, egads, we're going to have to celebrate next year when we have our 15th year celebration. But in the meantime, please do join me in thanking the Office of Broadband Development and her team for all their effort to partner with us. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors who can't do this alone, and really grateful to all the many organizations and partners who have in many ways helped us bring this conference this year. And I'd also like to thank my own team, my staff, Mary Magnuson and Christy Hoskins, who joined us, and Becky, who was with us here yesterday, for their support in helping putting this on. The bar that we set for ourselves in planning this event every year is pretty high. We want to make sure that you're glad you came and that you'll want to come again. That's a high bar, and I hope that you'll feel like it's been worth your time to come and be with us today. So a lot of us have been here since yesterday. We had a lot of learning and happen. I thought it would be fun this morning when we're all together, because you may have noticed that we have a bunch of us have been off shredding yesterday and today, and we haven't been together as a whole group. So let's get a little sense of who's in the room here this morning. Are there any elected officials here today, this morning? Do you stand up, please, elected officials? Let's give them our thanks. There we go. Awesome. Nice. How about any candidates for office in the... There we go. Candidates for office. Nice. Any city or county staff in the room? Stand up. Would you, city and county staff? These are the people that really get it done. You know that. Let's see our economic development professionals in the room. Workhorses also. Thank you, people. Good. Educators, teachers, administrators, there we are. Let's hear it for our educators. How about our provider community? What providers do we have with us today? Let's see your providers. Thank you, providers. Yes. Nice. Who's from a town of under 2,500? Lots of us. Okay. And what about anybody who's traveled from outside Minnesota to be here today? We got a couple, one person, all right. Anybody, let's see, everybody under 30 in the rooms. Raise your hand. Yes. Okay. Well, yes. There we go. Good. And who is here for the first time? Everybody here for this conference for the first time? Nice, nice. All right, well, let's welcome those newbies, especially. We want to see you back here. Thanks. So one of the things we're going to get to do today is to hear a little bit more about the Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition, because we all know that it's so important. It's all about our voice and making that heard and helping those people who make decisions about how to allocate our public resources, that they're well informed by the needs and perspectives and lived experience of rural people. And so we're going to be hearing more about how to join that bandwagon and make sure that that happens this year at the state legislature as well. Some of us who are members of the coalition have little buttons, little cute little sexy little stickers here. You can ask people wearing them about that, and then this afternoon we're going to hear more from them as well. And also this afternoon we will hear back from the shredders, the people from Waseca County and Coochin County and LeSueur County that have been designing networks while we've been up here learning about digital literacy. Yes, that'll be very interesting this afternoon. And I did want to also encourage everybody to tweet, share some of us have been actively tweeting. It's a great way. We've been live streaming the conference as well, but encourage you to share your impressions out as well. While I'm doing recognitions and thanks, I don't want to forget our CTEP. I always struggle with that acronym. Our CTEP volunteers, Katie Ward and Gus. Here they are up in front. Let's hear it. Shout out for the people behind the live stream. It's just been wonderful having them here, and those of us in the digital showcase got to hear about their work yesterday. But they'll be here all day, so if you'd like to connect up with them, please feel free. So I think with all the housekeeping, it's my pleasure now to turn to introducing Sam Drong, who's beloved in this community, I know, and well known to many of you. We're delighted Sam could be with us today. Sam's going to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. Sam has been a key mover and believer and builder of the PCs for People organization that has partnered with our land and broadband communities all these years, and he was where he served as Chief Program Officer, and is really committed to digital literacy and digital equity, and brings his heart to the work. And thanks for being here, Sam. Turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So as Bernadine mentioned, I have the honor of introducing Lisa Peterson de la Cueva. She's prepared a great talk about the need for prioritizing digital equity in our communities. Before she comes on stage, I'd like to frame this discussion just a bit through a picture, a couple of statistics, and some questions for you all to think about as Lisa's presenting. So first, the questions, a couple questions to think about as you're listening. First, what could digital equity look like in your community, and who could be included in creating that vision? So kind of think about that. Also, what are some first or maybe next steps that you can take in the next several months to prioritize digital equity in your institution? So we'll see those questions again later, but just think about that. This is the picture that I want to share. Just kind of a quick show of hands. Have people seen this picture before or something similar to it? Just some hands. It's something that I've really become fond of using this picture because I think oftentimes we incorrectly use equity and equality as the same thing, where they really do mean different things. And unfortunately, as it relates to digital inclusion, or in this case, digital equality, which is a term that we don't really use that much, and digital equity, you've got a long way to go. So for example, if we wanted to achieve greater digital equality in the US by way of making sure that everyone had a home computer or a device connecting to the internet, we would need to provide 7 million computers right now to African American households and an additional 7 million households to Latinx households just to achieve the same ownership rate as white households. So, which is, for what it's worth, is 78%. So it's just that's just getting us to the equality part. That's not even getting to the point where we're talking about equity. And then, so speaking of equity, then when we look to the other side of the image, that image challenges. It should challenge you a little bit. It should make you think about what you can do to make a change in that. We realize that we can't just take the "if you build it, they will come" approach when we're building our networks, for example. It's our responsibility to help those that have barriers to adoption that others might not have. One of the biggest barriers to digital equity is knowing how to take full advantage of the technology. Studies have shown that only 17% of households are considered digitally ready, which means they have the knowledge and the confidence to be discerning users of the latest technologies. So again, that's not a rural-urban divide, that's just the way it is, unfortunately. And again, it's only 17% really understand how to use the technologies that are in front of them. So now that I've shared that information and provided hopefully a little bit of framework for what Lisa's going to be talking about, I'd like to introduce Lisa. Lisa and I first met at my tenure at PCs for People while I was busy trying to address digital equity or digital inclusion. She was really working hard to address digital equity with her AmeriCorps team. And Lisa's a community-based educator and equity advocate who has been working on digital inclusion and civic engagement for the last 15 years. She's taught immigrants and refugee families digital skills in adult basic education and around the foreclosure crisis, community policing, housing, immigration, and education in the Twin Cities. She has additionally worked with Twin Cities Latino communities using media to advance the comprehensive immigration reform efforts in politics and law. For the last 5 years, Lisa's been working with the Community Technology Empowerment Project, an AmeriCorps program at the St. Paul Neighborhood Network to promote digital literacy efforts in low-wealth communities across the Twin Cities. It's my honor to introduce my colleague and friend, Lisa Peterson de la Cueva.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks to Blandon for having us today, and thank you to everybody for being here today. You may have noticed I raised my hand when we said, are you under 30? And I am definitely not under 30. I'm not sure why I said that. But I think it's because working with digital literacy and young AmeriCorps members really makes you feel young, which is an actual privilege. So I'm really happy to see a lot of people that I know this morning and also to see new faces. I've heard amazing stories about the work that you are all doing to promote internet access and digital skills in your own communities. And it is really inspiring. So I'm going to be talking about digital equity today, and I want to make it clear that I am speaking from an urban experience, urban vantage point, and I'm hoping that some of what I say will still resonate with the work that you are doing in your own communities. I think there are definitely some overlaps. There are other parts of my work that's unique to an urban experience. But I'm hoping that you'll take what I say, that some of the ideas will resonate with you, and for the ones that don't, that you can hold them in trust until they sort of meet their owners. So, a lot of the work that I've done around digital equity and the lessons that I've gained come from my work in the Twin Cities, and most recently my work at St. Paul Neighborhood Network. We're a community media organization in St. Paul. And for those of us who are on the ground working with equity, it can really feel daunting at times. I'm going to paint a little bit of a picture of what we're up against. A lot of the issues of digital inequities are inextricably tied to other intrinsic inequalities in our society. And those are related to class, race, gender. They're related to topics like housing, education, childcare. And these are really big topics for us to tackle as a community. So it's often hard for us to even say, wait, why should we prioritize digital issues when we have all these other things to deal with? But they are intrinsically linked. We're also in an interesting moment in American society. I say interesting sort of in a Minnesotan way, I guess. Where I really mean challenging. I think many of us are feeling a little bit anxious about democratic institutions that seem to be eroding. We are definitely in a period of widening income inequality. And if you don't think that exists, there are some real numbers to show the trajectory that we have been on and where we are going in terms of this gap, which I'll talk about later. We also have changing demographics in our country. We have an aging population, we have young immigrants coming in, We have marginalized groups that have historically been marginalized coming together and saying, enough. This isn't the society we want to be in. And I think that when you have all these different things mixed up, and again, a sort of disinvestment in the resources that we need to make our communities strong, you have groups of people who begin to look at each other through a competitive lens. That we have this finite pool of resources that we need to compete for. So rural versus urban, black versus white, American-born versus immigrant. And this is also the context where you have a resurgence of racism and xenophobia sort of in the cultural dialogue and the public sphere. So for those of us who are trying to level the playing field every day, in and out, this can feel really daunting. Does that feel like enough doom and gloom for everybody here? For equity practitioners, we live, breathe, and die doom and gloom, right? And it's not helpful just to admire the problem, which is the doom and gloom, but it is helpful for us to look and really understand inequities, because what it allows us to do is have a starting point. It's a catalyst for us to say what is wrong and what do we need to do to change it. So, in the past, in our society, we've had large periods of inequities. We've had slavery. We've had women who weren't able to vote. We've had policies, and I say of white supremacy. We've had a huge gender gap in participation in politics and leadership positions, which is still continuing today. And we've also had periods where you have large consolidation of wealth, which we're seeing right now. And in these instances, it has been the role and the responsibility of people to push back against these institutions that are taking us down a particular trajectory and say, this is not the society that we want. And social movements, political movements, legal movements have done this successfully over and over again. And I would argue the work that you are doing is absolutely crucial to creating a more equitable society. That you are part of a movement that is saying enough is enough, we want a more equitable society, we want people to have more access to digital skills, digital tools, and we want everybody to be able to participate in the same way. I want to talk a little bit about the lessons that we've learned in CTEP that you might be able to apply, because prioritizing equity is a really hard thing to do. It's very easy to let it go by the wayside in your institution. But before I talk about sort of what we've done, I want to talk a little bit about our program and the context that we're doing that in. Bernadine said she always gets tripped by CTEP. I work with the St. Paul Neighborhood Network at the Community Technology Empowerment Project, which is an AmeriCorps program. Katie and Gus, who Bernadine just introduced, are one of 35 AmeriCorps members, and these members are out all across the Twin Cities teaching technology skills for civic, economic, and other types of empowerment. So we really work specifically with low wealth people. We also work with people who just have low technology skills. So we have about 6,000 people who come through our doors, and again, we are all over the Twin Cities. We're at libraries, workforce centers, adult basic education centers, and community media centers. So can I just get a show of hands? How many people have helped somebody else use a computer in the last 6 months? How many many people had to teach somebody where the on button was? All right, these are our digital literacy practitioners. Or maybe you're just helping your grandma, your mom. So the people in our organization, our participants, really come from a wide range of skills with technology. There are some people who might have some comfort level with technology, and there are other people that don't know where the on button is. So, you know, Katie was just telling me a story about she was in the open computer lab and saw somebody trying to move the mouse, and they couldn't get it to move the cursor, and you know, she got really frustrated, and she just started waving it in the air. Just like, I want it to go this way. So we're asking people to do these kind of conceptual leaps for something that seems so incredibly innate to us. And I want to just give you a quick video about our work. Every year we have each one of these members who are teaching technology skills out on the ground just make a video about their year, something that kind of gets to the heart of what we do. And this is a video that somebody made. She was at a supportive housing site and working with people every day on computer skills. So,
pretty bad at it. I avoided it where I'm sorry guys, I'm about to use my best NPR voice for this, and it's not very good. Before coming to CTEP, I didn't consider myself as someone who was good at technology. In fact, I thought I was pretty bad at it. I avoided it where I could and asked other people to do things on the computer for me. I never really tried to get comfortable with it because I assumed that I wouldn't be able to, that it was somehow beyond me. When I started teaching, I realized that I did know a lot, and the stuff that I didn't know, I felt confident I could figure out. I was lucky to have grown up with the language. Once I gained confidence, it wasn't difficult to join the conversation. Most of my students have not had access to this language, and it is a language all its own. Why else would a Mac look like so much Russian to someone like me who's used PCs all her life? I have always taken those building blocks for granted. It is so important to teach people this language. I want to say something cheesy about how technology opens up a whole new world for people, but that's not really true. It just opens up the world, whether it's through employment, education, community, or even just the feeling that you're a part of it all, that you belong. This year, my students have taught me that once you have the language, access to the technology, and confidence that you can figure out what you don't already know, the world can feel just a little bit bigger. And now I have said something really cheesy.
you can do cheesy. So, I want to go back to something that Sam said as it relates to this video, but could I just have 3 tables? So this table here, that table, and that table, could you stand up for a second? Yeah, the next one over, and then the next one behind the table that's standing. Great. And then could I get the 4 tables kind of lining the back wall to stand up? Yeah. That might be, maybe this table can kind of, maybe a couple people can sit down. All right. Sam mentioned that 17% of people are considered digitally ready in our country. And that means that you have digital skills. Not only that, you use them frequently, and you trust the information and the systems that are online. So this group over here, you are part of the elite. I don't really like using that word, but I mean that it's a privilege. You have an incredible privilege that many people don't have. This group of people over here, you're part of the 23% of people who are completely unprepared, or what they call cautious clickers, have really, really limited skills. So if you guys can sit down and your group can stay standing. What I like about that video, and you guys can sit, but it gives you a visual picture here, right? What I like about that video and the work that we do, and you really can't understand it unless you're doing the direct service on the ground with people, is that our members who are doing this day in and day out, it slowly starts to dawn on those of us who are doing this throughout the year what it means to have digital skills, what you can access, what you can't access, and the huge gulf that exists between those who don't and those who do. So we have a lot of work to do, and it helps, I think, if you're doing these things on the ground to understand what work, resources, and things that we need to do to level the playing field, to get that group of people up to this group of people, or for that matter, the people in the middle, right? So we've been throwing these terms around. This is a definition of digital equity that comes from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and they say that digital equity ensures all individuals and communities have information technology capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. Digital equity is necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, and access to essential services. So it's really helpful for us to have that because it gives us a target. It's a goal. Digital inclusion, on the other hand, is the path. And we are all on that path together here. And I'd like to get a show of hands. Again, this is a definition made by the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. And I have links to all these things on the PowerPoint. So if you are working on providing affordable broadband service, raise your hand. Right. If you're working on providing devices to users, so helping people get access to things, raise your hand nice and high. Great. Access to digital literacy training. Great. Technical support. Anybody working on technical support? Yeah? There's some people saying yeah. All right. And then anybody working on online content out there and trying to make it more palatable, more easy for users to use. Okay. Great. So that is what we're all doing. And when I saw that list and I think about it, I remembered this, when I've done work with Latino communities and political organizing, I have worked with people who have long hours, long jobs, and then they come to rallies or they come to organizing groups, and I've asked them, why are you here? And there is a phrase that they use, and it's, pues es que necesitaba hacer algo, tenía que poner mi granito de arena. And it's like, I need to do something, I have to add. And that is basically what you're doing. You're adding your little grain of sand to the work that we're doing. The only problem with that metaphor is that you might be adding your little grain of sand, but what are you adding it to? We're just adding little piles here and there of different amounts? Or are we trying to create something more beautiful like a beach that we can all go to during the winter months? So equity ensures that all people are part of the decision-making process when you're creating that vision for the kind of society that you want to make. There is a temptation in our work to think of us over here giving skills to those people over there, and that is what is meant by equity. And what we've learned at CTEP, and I think there's a movement across the country right now working on this, is that we have so much work to do in our own backyard, and we have a lot of control over what we do. And this is where equity plans in your own institutions come to play. So one thing that we can do is examine our own institutions and do an inventory and create a plan. We are doing this at CTEP right now. And the kinds of questions that we want to ask ourselves are, who's in the room? Are there as many men and women in leadership positions? Where are we spending our resources? Who are we contracting? So these kinds of questions can really change the way that we do our work. Are we paying a living wage to the people within our own institutions? So at CTEP, we started with a committee of AmeriCorps members because we looked around and we realized we're doing all this work in communities of color, white communities as well, but a lot of our targets, communities of color, and part of our mission is to close the employment gap between white people and communities of color, men and women. We looked around, and in our program, almost everybody in our program was white. And we have to ask these really hard questions. Why is that? Can everybody do a year of service? What can we do to change that? And it turns out, just taking one example of that, how can we have these conversations in the first place? Minnesotans don't like to sit down and have tough conversations about race, class, resource sharing, but we're doing it. And the really wonderful thing about this, and I really encourage you to look at some of these links, is that there are blueprints out there. It's not rocket science. There are plans that you can do that are multi-year. There are frameworks. There are consultants. There are people that are really doing this tough work, rolling up their sleeves, and helping organizations look at equity within their own sphere. The fourth one is one that Jane Leonard told me about yesterday from the Rockefeller Foundation. And they talk about an inclusive economy. And what does it mean if you're doing community development to make sure that that is including everybody. And they have inventories and tools and funding available to look at that kind of stuff. So that's one way, before we kind of talk about other ways to prioritize digital equity in your work, right? One way is to really look at ourselves. The second way, there's Nikema Levy-Pounds is a civil rights lawyer and activist in the Twin Cities who is out and about town a lot. And she recently gave a workshop saying, well, equity plans are great. You can do all these institutional things, but what happens is that they often go by the wayside. They might feel like lip service rather than the deep work. And in addition to doing that, you need to advocate. You need to align yourself with social movements and equity movements that are actually out there. Through your work with digital inclusion, you're going to be connected to one social issue or another that's looking at who's got power, who doesn't. I'll give you an example from CTEP. We are an employment-focused program, and so we have a considerable amount of insight into wages and income inequality in our system. It's just part of our work. It's part of our daily work. So we have stories to tell, and I'm going to tell you a few. And this is part of what you want to start doing, is aligning yourself with an issue, go out and tell your stories. Online, in person, through advocacy. A few years ago, we started seeing this trend, and this is an example that really illustrates it. But online job applications have become incredibly convoluted and incredible barriers to employment. So we had a member who was at a library over on the east side of St. Paul, and they were helping somebody. They came in for a job, and they said, okay, let's do the job application together. They've been working on computer skills together for months. And they did the job application, and it was a 24-page job application. So imagine, click, move to the next page, go to the next page. It included a personality test. These are very, very popular right now. So personality test. And on page 22 or 23, they got to another section, was embedded another 15-page arbitration agreement. And this person was not, they spoke some English, so they were able to talk, but they were not a high-level English speaker. So our member sat there and said, okay, so this paragraph means you can't sue the company if you get hurt. And this paragraph means you can't sue the company if, you know, you're discriminated against. You'll use an arbitrator. It's an incredible, different world out there. We have created a digital monster, I guess, and it's alive. And not only that, but you have another layer. This person submit their application, 3 hours later, they got a call back, or they got an email. They didn't get the job. 3 hours later. They hadn't made it past the algorithms. The algorithms are really problematic, partly because the artificial intelligence with them is taking on biases that we have in our own community. It turns out the job that person was applying for was a minimum wage job for an overnight stocking at a big box retail store. So this was not a hugely, they were not using their digital skills to get to the next level of a middle skill job or anything like that, right? And this is a trend that we're also seeing in CTEP that's really problematic, it's really worrying. We have generally been getting more low-wage jobs in Minnesota. That's the direction we've been going in. And we also have one of the highest levels of digitalization in the workforce in the country. So that means we have, on the left, you'll see that chart that shows how many jobs have like an intrinsic daily level of digitalization. And it's grown significantly. On the other side, this is linked to Deed, if you click on the link, you'll see that the fastest growing jobs are low-wage jobs. So that is something that really feels hard for the participants in our program as well as for the members. And it gets to the point where a lot of people are kind of saying, well, what's the point? You know, I'm learning these skills, but we're getting out to these jobs where I don't even know if it's good quality of life. They're long hours. They demand much of us. And last year we went to PCs for People and on Martin Luther King Day, and we did a service project. And we sat down afterwards and we read this speech called The World House. Has anybody read this speech? I saw one hand. All right. He gave this speech when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize. It was toward the end of his career, and he was really thinking globally about racism and capitalism and spirituality. And I linked to it here. I really recommend that you read it with your colleagues because it ties a lot to some of the themes that we're talking about with digital equity. But there was a quote in that really resonated with a lot of our members who are talking about this. You know, what's the point of getting people jobs that are so low wage when we have a large working poor population? And the quote from that speech is, every man, and Martin Luther King is talking sort of about these two different worlds that we live in, the internal and the external. I'll explain what that means. He says, every man lives in two realms, the internal and the external. The internal is the realm of spiritual ends expressed in art, literature, morals, and religion. The external is that complex of devices, techniques, mechanisms, and instrumentalities by means we live. Our problem today is that we have allowed the internal to become lost in the external. We have allowed the means by which we live to outdistance the ends for which we live. So much of modern life can be summarized in that suggestive phrase of Thoreau, improved means to an unimproved end. So, though we are working on digital inclusion and digital literacy, we, at CTEP at least, need to start aligning ourselves with social movements, political movements that are actually addressing the root cause of the work that we do. Otherwise, we're spinning our wheels. So some of the hopeful things that are happening, we have some federal funding for youth employment programs that's actually working in the Twin Cities. It's helping to close the employment gaps. We have something called Ban the Box. This was passed several years ago as an initiative sort of tied to decarceration initiatives around the country. And it said that people with a criminal history didn't have to put that on the first page of their job application. And that immediately opened the door for higher wages and for people to have the opportunity to get into the interview stage. And that has had a huge impact in rural communities too. And then we've also passed a living wage ordinance in the Twin Cities. And this is really helpful. It's going to be a learning process. I think small businesses are going to have to figure that out, but we're figuring it out together. So when you're talking about equity, it's really important not to just look at your own institution, to do that kind of things, but to align yourself with some kind of movement and then help advocate for that movement. I think part of technology is we have a fear that it's going to replace part of the really wonderful parts of our society and our life, that it actually disconnects us more than it connects us. I guess in the mid-2000s, I was working at a citizen journalism newspaper, the Twin Cities Daily Planet, and we worked on a project that was really trying to use digital tools to promote democracy through dialogue. And there was this idea, especially at the time, it was really exciting. There were, this new thing called the internet. People were actually using it. Wouldn't it be awesome if the internet could be a space for people who thought differently to come together, to express those opinions, to deliberate over them politely, and then to build consensus, to create some kind of consensus on where we need to go as a society. It turns out the internet is not always that awesome of a space for that. And that digital tools don't always bring us together. They are wonderful at bringing like-minded people together. There are wonderful spaces online and digital tools are being used for that. Whether it's gaming or political marches, we've seen lots of different examples today. So this is problematic because we want democracy to look like consensus building, deliberation, debate, unity. We often think of democracy looking like this. But I would argue that it also should look like this. How many people are actually doing digital literacy training? Can I see those show of hands again? It's a joyful job. Our open computer labs and our classrooms are really wonderful. People come together, they learn that they actually do have some skills, and if they don't have those skills, that they have the capacity to learn them. People learn how to use Facebook so that they can connect with their granddaughter for the first time. They learn how to give a PowerPoint presentation. There's some serious high-fiving in our classrooms. I'm seeing Katie and Gus Knott. They are really wonderful spaces. Not only are they wonderful spaces because you have this learning going on, this empowerment, this education, they're also really wonderful because they bring together people who are different. We do a lot of work with volunteers. So we have the 35 members, but then we're also leveraging thousands of volunteers to come in and teach these skills. We're seeing the adverse effects of policies around immigration. So here's one example of something that plays out in our computer labs. We have a lot of students. This picture is taken from a workshop we just did, talking about the challenges in the computer lab, teaching digital skills. And one of them was the kind of trust and confidence that people have in giving up their information in computer labs right now. In particular, immigrants and refugees have a high level of fear what does it mean if I give up my information on a job application or on an email address? Does that mean I'm going to get deported? Will the INS pick me up with this information? How about this teacher I've never met? Should I trust them? On the other hand, I would say broadly, we have this high level of fear of immigrants right now in our country. We have a lot of fear, partly based on the other, and part of it sort of on this, again, competitive lens for jobs. In our computer labs, we have people who have never traveled before, who have lived in Minnesota all their lives, paired with a brand new refugee from Myanmar. So this is an example that I went back to. This is an example of 3 refugees from Myanmar. They're Karen and Karani, and they're teaching an older woman who's American and has never left the country. And what this does, I think, is it connects us as a community, and it starts to create some sort of a sense that we are in this together, that we can learn together, that we can be a community together. And this is all coming out of a space of digital skills. You can't have a democracy if everybody fears one another. And if this isn't happening in digital spaces, then we can make it happen in the real world, in our own communal spaces. So that's sort of a pitch for the importance of encounter. I used immigration as an example. There are plenty of other organizations, older people, younger people. I mean, there's so much value to bringing people together. I've heard today, and just yesterday, a lot of references to this idea of sort of a rural renaissance or sort of what we want to see in the future in rural communities. And I think it's great, it's important to evoke a vision of what is possible. But as we're doing that in terms of digital equity, I think it's really important to say, you know, if we want a rural renaissance, then whose renaissance will that be? And who can we include in the decision making, and how can we make that happen together as a community? In the past, we've had this notion of equality in America, that all men are created equal. And that notion, in and of itself, had to evolve to include women, to include African Americans, and that happened because people pushed the narrative forward. I think for those of us in this room, we can push the narrative forward about who is included in this digital economy, who's going to partake in the benefits that it brings, the higher wages that it brings, the increased connectedness, and we want people to be able to participate in our democracy with these tools. So I encourage you, I'm going to pass it back over to Sam to think about these questions, but I've tried to provide even just 3 very simple ways that we can start to integrate this into the fabric of our work. Because if we don't, we will go on a path that is pushing us towards inequality. So thank you so much for the work that you do, and I'm happy to chat afterwards as well.
These were the questions that I had asked you to think about when I made my opening remarks. I guess I'd like to just, I think we're okay on time, right? I think we've got a little bit. Okay, so if everybody, maybe we could just take 2 minutes and do something very kind of un-Minnesotan, and maybe just talk amongst ourselves in our groups about some of these really tough issues, and maybe if anybody would be willing to share their thoughts in these last few minutes, that'd be great. So I'll just give it a couple minutes for you guys to talk about.
Very nice. Talk amongst yourselves. I think